The morning air felt different somehow as Andrew Johnson walked toward the front doors of Westlake High School. His shoulders were straight, but his eyes stayed low, scanning the unfamiliar concrete path leading to his new life. First days were never easy, but being 16 and starting over mid-year made everything harder. Andrew adjusted his backpack, feeling the weight of more than just textbooks. His dad had promised this move would be good for them. New town, new opportunities, he'd said with that confident smile that came from 20 years of military discipline. But Andrew knew better. New town meant being the outsider all over again. New town meant being the only black kid in most of his classes. The school hallway buzzed with the chaos of students rushing to first period. Andrew clutched his schedule, the paper already creased from his tight grip. Room 203 history. He navigated through the crowd, feeling eyes follow him as he passed. Some curious, some indifferent, some already judging. "Yo, check out the new kid," a voice called out, just loud enough to be heard over the hallway noise. Andrew didn't turn. He'd learned long ago that showing reaction only made things worse. The voice belonged to Chris Parker, though Andrew wouldn't learn his name until later. Chris stood with his group near the lockers, the kind of boys who ruled small-town high schools through fear and family connections. Chris's father owned half the real estate in town, which meant Chris owned most of the students. "I wonder if he's lost," another boy snickered. "Geography buildings on the other side of town." Andrew kept walking, his face a practiced mask of calm. What these boys couldn't see was the storm beneath. What they couldn't know was that for the past 8 years, Andrew had lived in Brazil, where his uncle had taken him under his wing at his martial arts academy. Brazilian jiu-jitsu became more than just a hobby. It was Andrew's language, his therapy, his identity. In class, Andrew took a seat in the back corner. Strategic positioning, back against the wall, full view of the room, minimal exposure. The teacher, Mrs. Chen, gave him a quick introduction that made several students turn and stare. He nodded politely when expected to, spoke only to give his name, and then gratefully faded back into anonymity as the lesson began. By lunchtime, Andrew had successfully blended into the background in most classes. He found an empty table in the cafeteria corner and unwrapped the lunch his dad had packed: rice, beans, and grilled chicken prepared with Brazilian spices. The familiar aroma provided a moment of comfort. That comfort was short-lived. Chris and his friends chose that moment to walk by, deliberately bumping Andrew's table and slushing his water bottle. "Sorry about that," Chris said with exaggerated politeness. "Didn't see you there." His friends laughed on cue. Andrew wiped up the spill with his napkin. "No problem," he said quietly, his slight accent noticeable. "Oh, we got an accent too," one of Chris's friends said. "Where are you from exactly?" "I moved here from Brazil," Andrew answered simply, hoping they'd lose interest. The boys exchanged looks. "Brazil? You play soccer then? Dance around in those carnival outfits?" Chris made a mocking dance movement with his hands. Andrew took a bite of his food, ignoring the comment. His silence wasn't from fear. His old sensei's words echoed in his mind. The true fighter knows when not to fight. Later that afternoon, Andrew found some unexpected friendly faces. Raj, a quiet Indian-American kid who shared his math class, and Lee, a tall, skinny guy who practically lived in the computer lab. They showed him around the campus, pointing out which hallways to avoid and which teachers were cool. As the final bell rang, Andrew walked home alone, taking the long route to map out his new surroundings. In the garage of their modest rental house, his dad had already set up a small training area with mats and a punching bag. This was their compromise. The move was necessary for his dad's new job, but Andrew could continue his training. That evening, as Andrew went through his jiu-jitsu forms with practiced precision, his movements flowed with a grace and power that would have shocked his new classmates. His hands, now taping a perfect cross-strike against the bag, were the same hands that had won 3 junior national championships in Brazil. The new kid at Westlake High wasn't just anyone, but nobody knew that yet. By Friday of his first week, Andrew had settled into something of a routine. Wake up at 5:30, train for an hour, shower, eat the breakfast his dad prepared, and walk to school with his head down and his mind focused. The whispers still followed him through the hallways, but he'd gotten better at tuning them out. Rage had become something of a guide for Andra, showing him the shortcuts between buildings and explaining the unwritten rules of Westlake High. Chris and his friends usually hang out by the gym entrance after third period, Rage explained during lunch. Better to take the long way around if you can. Andra nodded, poking at his cafeteria pizza. I'm not looking for trouble. Trouble has a way of finding the new kids here, Lee chimed in, sliding his tray onto their table. His lanky frame folded awkwardly into the seat. Especially when Chris's dad just donated a new scoreboard for the football field. Makes him feel even more untouchable. As if summoned by his name, Chris appeared behind Lee, flanked by two of his friends. Making friends with the charity cases? Chris asked, dropping a heavy hand on Andrew's shoulder. Andrew tensed but didn't move. 8 years of training had taught him control. We missed you in the hallway earlier, Chris continued. Thought maybe you'd gotten lost again. I know my way around now, Andrew said evenly. Thanks for your concern. Chris's grip tightened slightly. You know, there's an unofficial welcome tradition for new students here. Lee looked down at his food. Rage's eyes widened with worry. I think I'll pass, Andrew replied, still not looking up. Chris leaned closer. Wasn't really offering a choice. He straightened up and glanced at his friends. See you after school, new kid. Behind the gym. They walked away laughing. When the final bell rang, Andrew considered his options. He could avoid the confrontation, take the side exit, and head straight home. That would be the smart play. But then tomorrow would be worse, and the day after even more so. You're not actually going, are you? Rage asked as they packed up in their last class. Sometimes the only way past something is through it, Andrew said, repeating one of his uncle's favorite sayings. They'll be waiting with at least 5 guys, Lee warned. Chris never fights fair. Andrew slipped his backpack on. I'm not planning to fight anyone. Behind the gym, as expected, Chris waited with 4 of his friends. Their varsity jackets stood out like uniforms of authority in the afternoon sun. He actually showed, one of them said as Andrew approached, hands in his pockets, expression neutral. Chris stepped forward. So the new kid has some backbone after all. I just want to get through the school year, Andrew said clearly. I'm not looking for enemies or trouble. Should have thought about that before coming to our school, another boy called out. Chris circled Andrew like a shark. Let's see what they teach you in Brazil besides dancing. He shoved Andrew hard from behind. Andrew stumbled forward but caught himself easily, turning to face Chris. Come on, Chris taunted. Show us something. Andrew remained still, his breathing controlled. His uncle's voice echoed in his mind. A real fighter knows the weight of his hands. He carries them like loaded weapons. Chris grew frustrated with Andrew's lack of response and moved in again, this time swinging a wild punch toward Andrew's face. With minimal movement, Andrew shifted his weight, allowing the punch to miss by inches. He's scared, someone laughed. Chris grabbed Andrew's shirt, pulling him close. You should be scared. In the distance, a teacher's voice called out, What's going on over there? Chris released Andrew with a shove. This isn't over, not even close. He backed away with his friends, pointing at Andrew. Monday, you won't have a teacher to save you. As the group disappeared around the corner, Rage and Lee emerged from their hiding spot near the gym door. That was either the bravest or dumbest thing I've seen, Lee said, adjusting his glasses. Andrew picked up his backpack from where he'd set it down. Neither. Just delaying the inevitable. That evening, Andrew trained harder than usual, his strikes against the punching bag more focused, more precise. His father watched from the garage doorway. Trouble at school? He asked, recognizing the intensity in his son's movements. Andrew landed a perfect combination before answering. Nothing I can't handle. His father stepped onto the mat. Sometimes handling it doesn't mean what you think. He placed his hands up as targets for Andrew to strike. Remember what your uncle taught you about the responsibility of strength. As they trained together, Andrew felt the week's tension slowly release with each strike. Monday would come soon enough. And when it did, he would be ready, though not in the way Chris and his friends expected. Monday arrived with dark clouds and the promise of rain, matching Andrew's mood as he walked through Westlake High's main entrance. 3 weeks had passed since he'd started at the school, and while things with Chris had settled into a tense standoff, Andrew knew it was just the calm before the storm. You look like you slept about as well as I did, Rage said, falling into step beside him. Dark circles hung under his friend's eyes. Big science project? Andrew asked, knowing Raj had been working on an entry for the state competition. Raj nodded, clutching a carefully wrapped display board to his chest. 3 weeks of work right here. My parents will actually notice me if I place in the top 3. They separated for morning classes, agreeing to meet at lunch. The day dragged on, teachers' voices blending into white noise as Andrew watched the clock. After the confrontation behind the gym, Chris had backed off, but the looks he gave Andrew in the hallways had grown darker, more calculated. By afternoon, the promised rain had arrived, drumming against the classroom windows. When the final bell rang, Andrew packed up slowly, watching students rush for buses and cars. He was about to head out when he realized he hadn't seen Raj since morning. A heavy feeling settled in his stomach. Andrew checked the science lab first, then the library. Nothing. He was heading toward the main exit when he heard voices echoing from around the corner, the hallway leading to the back doors. Please just give it back. Raj's voice cracked with desperation. Andrew moved quickly, turning the corner to find Raj surrounded by Chris and 3 of his friends. Raj's science project lay on the floor, the display board cracked down the middle, papers scattered across the wet floor where rain had blown in from the propped open door. Whoops, Chris said, stepping deliberately on one of the papers. Looks like you'll have to start over. 3 weeks of work, Raj said, his voice barely a whisper now. Why would you do this? Because people like you need to remember your place, one of Chris's friends answered, shoving Raj against the lockers. And what place is that? Andrew asked, his voice carrying down the hallway. Everyone turned. Chris's face twisted into an ugly smile. Well, if it isn't the correct kid. We were just having a chat with your friend here about his little science experiment. Andrew walked forward slowly, stopping to pick up some of Raj's papers from the floor. Looks more like you're destroying something he worked hard on. Mind your own business, Chris warned, stepping toward Andrew. Unless you're finally ready for that welcome we talked about. For the first time since arriving at Westlake, Andrew felt something shift inside him. The careful control his uncle had taught him wavered as he looked at Raj's crushed expression at 3 weeks of work ruined by pointless cruelty. You don't have to do this, Raj whispered as Andrew handed him the salvaged papers. Yeah, listen to your little friend, Chris mocked. Walk away while you still can. Andrew turned to face Chris directly. Why don't you walk away? You've made your point. You've ruined his project. What more do you want? Something dangerous flashed in Chris's eyes. I want you to understand who runs this school. He shoved Andrew hard, sending him back against the lockers with a metallic bang. For a split second, Andrew's training kicked in. His hands came up automatically, body shifting into a fighting stance. Chris's eyes widened slightly, seeing something unexpected in Andrew's reaction. The moment hung between them, teetering on the edge of violence. Then Andrew slowly lowered his hands and straightened up. Not today, he said quietly. What's that supposed to mean? Chris demanded. It means I'm taking my friend home, Andrew answered, turning to help Raj gather what remained of his project. And it means you should think carefully about what happens next. Is that a threat? One of Chris's friends asked, stepping forward. Andrew looked at each of them, his gaze steady and unflinching. No, it's a warning. Something in his voice made them hesitate. Andrew helped Raj to his feet, and they walked out into the rain, leaving Chris and his friends staring after them. Why didn't you fight back? Raj asked as they walked home under Andrew's umbrella. I know you could have. Andrew was quiet for a long moment, rain drumming on the fabric above them. My uncle always said fighting should be the last option, not the first. But he also said there comes a point when not fighting becomes the same as accepting wrong. And where's that point for you? Raj asked. Andrew looked back toward the school, barely visible through the rain. I think we're getting very close to finding out. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Andrew woke before his alarm, his mind replaying yesterday's confrontation. He went through his training routine with unusual intensity, each move precise and focused. His father watched from the doorway, coffee mug in hand. You want to talk about it? He asked, stepping onto the mat. Andrew continued his forms. Not really. Your face says otherwise. His father set down his mug. I know that look. Saw it on your uncle's face plenty of times before a big match. Andrew stopped, breathing hard. It's nothing I can't handle. That's what worries me. His father picked up the hand pads. Come on, show me what's got you so wound up. They trained together until Andrew's shoulders relaxed. As he showered and dressed for school, his father's parting words echoed in his mind. Remember, fighting isn't just about knowing how, it's about knowing when. The school day crawled by without incident. No sign of Chris or his friends. Even at lunch, their usual table remained empty. The absence felt more threatening than their presence. They weren't in math class either, Lee said, picking at his sandwich. Maybe they all got food poisoning from those mystery meat tacos yesterday. Reg shook his head. They're planning something. Chris doesn't just back down. Andrew said nothing, but the knot in his stomach tightened. The final bell rang, and as students flooded the hallways, Andrew packed his bag slowly, scanning the crowd. Want us to walk home together? Rage offered. I've got a computer club meeting, Lee said, but I can skip it. Andrew shook his head. I'll be fine. You guys go ahead. The parking lot was nearly empty by the time Andrew pushed through the side doors. A light rain had started again, blurring the edges of things. He'd made it halfway across the lot when he saw them, Chris and 5 others, spread out in a loose semicircle, blocking his path. There he is, Chris called out. Brazil boy finally decided to show his face. Andrew stopped, adjusting his backpack strap. I just want to go home, Chris. Yeah, well, we have unfinished business. Chris stepped forward. Your little friend Lee got a lesson during lunch period today. Wouldn't stop running his mouth about yesterday. Andrew's hands tightened into fists. What did you do to him? Nothing permanent, one of the others laughed. Just locked him in the janitor's closet for a while. Probably still in there crying for his mommy. Andrew glanced back toward the school building. He could go back, find Lee, avoid this fight. But even as he considered it, the circle tightened around him. No running this time, Chris said. You've been acting tough since you got here. Let's see what you're really made of. The first punch came from behind. A cheap shot that Andrew sensed more than saw. Years of training took over. He pivoted, letting the fist graze past his ear, then stepped back to create space. 6 against 1, Andrew said, dropping his backpack to the wet pavement. Is that how you handle everything, Chris? Get him, Chris ordered, and 2 of his friends rushed forward. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Andrew moved with a fluid grace that none of them had expected. The first attacker found his arm caught, his momentum used against him as Andrew redirected him into the second boy. Both went down hard on the wet pavement. The circle tightened. Another boy swung wildly, a haymaker that would have done serious damage if it had connected. Andrew ducked under it and swept the boy's legs from under him with a low spinning kick. What the hell? Someone muttered. 3 down, 3 to go. Chris's confident smirk had vanished, replaced by something between shock and fear. Andrew hadn't even thrown a punch yet, just redirected their own energy and momentum against them. He knows what he's doing, one of the remaining boys warned, backing away slightly. I don't care what he knows, Chris snapped, pulling something from his pocket, the glint of metal sending a chill through Andrew's spine. A small pocket knife clicked open. Let's see how good he is now. Everything changed in that moment. Andrew's expression hardened, his stance shifted subtly. The boy next to Chris must have sensed the change. Dude, put that away. This is getting serious. Shut up, Chris hissed, lunging forward with the knife. Andrew moved like water. He caught Chris's wrist, twisted sharply, and applied pressure to a point that made Chris's fingers open involuntarily. The knife clattered to the ground. In the same motion, Andrew swept Chris's legs and controlled his fall, pinning him face down on the pavement with his arm locked behind him. It's over, Andrew said firmly, his knee in the small of Chris's back. Get him off me, Chris shouted, but his remaining friends stood frozen, staring at how quickly their leader had been neutralized. From across the parking lot, a voice shouted, Hey, what's going on over there? Andrew recognized the school security guard running toward them. He released Chris and stepped back, hands raised to show he wasn't a threat. He attacked us. Chris scrambled to his feet, pointing at Andrew. All of us, he's crazy. The security guard looked skeptically at the scene. 3 boys on the ground, Chris red-faced and pointing, and Andrew standing calmly with his hands visible. Is that your knife on the ground, son? the guard asked, looking at Chris. The color drained from Chris's face. In the distance, a phone was held high, recording everything. News would spread fast, very fast. By the next morning, the video of the parking lot fight had spread through the entire school. Andrew sat in Principal Wilson's office, hands folded in his lap, while his father spoke in low, measured tones beside him. My son was defending himself against 6 boys, one with a weapon, his father explained, military posture evident even in the small office chair. The video makes that perfectly clear. Principal Wilson, a thin man with permanent worry lines, nodded slowly. The video does support Andrew's account. However, our zero-tolerance policy on fighting means I still have to take disciplinary action. So the boy who brought a knife to school and the one who was protecting himself get the same punishment. Andrew's father's voice remained calm, but his eyes hardened. The principal sighed. Chris has been suspended pending a disciplinary hearing. His situation is more serious. He turned to Andrew. For you, I'm requiring a 3-day suspension starting today. Andrew nodded, accepting the decision without argument. As they left the office, he caught sight of Chris's father, a tall man in an expensive suit, arguing loudly with the vice principal down the hall. This is ridiculous. My son Walden't. His voice cut off as he spotted Andrew and his father walking past. The man's eyes narrowed. That's him, isn't it? The one who attacked my boy. Andrew's father stepped slightly in front of his son. Your son and 5 friends cornered mine in the parking lot. One of them pulled a knife. There were witnesses and there's video. I suggest you watch it before making accusations. The man's face reddened. Do you know who I am in this town? I don't particularly care, Andrew's father replied evenly. What I care about is my son's safety. Make sure your boy understands that if he comes near mine again with any ill intentions, the school suspension will be the least of his concerns. The walk home was quiet, fallen leaves crunching under their feet. Finally, Andrew spoke. Am I in trouble with you too? His father was silent for several steps. You controlled the situation without seriously hurting anyone, even when threatened with a weapon. Your uncle would be proud of your technique. He paused. But I'm concerned about what happens next. Small towns have long memories. The suspension stretched out like 3 empty days. Andrew trained harder than ever, worked on homework sent by his teachers, and ignored the constant buzz of his phone as classmates sent messages about the fight. By the 3rd day, cabin fever was setting in. A knock at the front door surprised him. Andrew opened it to find Rage and Lee standing on his porch, Lee sporting a bruised cheek and split lip. Thought you might be bored, Lee said with a half smile. Also, I wanted to say thanks. Those guys had me locked in that closet for almost 2 hours before the janitor found me. Andrew stepped back to let them in. You don't look so good. Lee touched his swollen lip. Yeah, they roughed me up a bit first, but you should see the other guys. He laughed, then winced. Actually, we did see them. Chris has his arm in a sling, and 2 others are limping around school. You're kind of a legend now. That's not exactly what I wanted, Andrew said, leading them to the living room. Raj set his backpack down. Well, legend or not, you've changed things. Kids who used to be afraid to speak up are talking now. Talking about what? Andrew asked. About Chris and his friends. Turns out we weren't the only ones they've been terrorizing. Raj pulled out his tablet. There's a whole thread on the school message board. At least 12 students have come forward with stories. Lee nodded. The principal called an assembly yesterday about bullying. First time the school's ever really addressed it. And get this, Krista's dad was there, sitting in the back, looking like someone had just told him his stocks crashed. Andrew felt conflicted. He hadn't wanted attention or to become the center of a school drama. But if something good was coming from it. There's something else, Raj added hesitantly. Mr. Parker, Chris's dad, he's been asking questions around town about you. Where you trained, your background, that sort of thing. A cold feeling settled in Andrew's stomach. Why would he do that? Control, Lee said simply. His family controls everything in this town. You're the first person who's ever really challenged that. Andrew was about to respond when his phone rang, the school's number flashing on screen. He answered cautiously. Andrew? This is Principal Wilson. I need to speak with you and your father tomorrow morning before classes resume. There have been developments. After hanging up, Andrew relayed the conversation to his friends. Developments could mean anything, Raj said, but his expression was worried. Lee leaned forward. Whatever happens tomorrow, you're not facing it alone. Half the school is on your side now. That night, Andrew couldn't sleep. He stood by his bedroom window, watching the neighborhood's quiet streets. 3 weeks ago, he'd been the new kid, trying to blend in and avoid trouble. Now he was at the center of what felt like a small-town earthquake, fault lines cracking open to reveal years of buried grievances. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. With hesitation, he opened it. This isn't over. Nobody embarrasses my family and gets away with it. CP. Andrew stared at the message for a long moment before deleting it. Whatever tomorrow brought, he would face it the same way he faced everything, with quiet strength and the discipline his training had taught him. But for the first time since moving to this town, he wouldn't be facing it alone. The next morning felt heavy with anticipation as Andrew and his father walked through the school's main entrance. Students stopped to stare, conversations dropping to whispers as they passed. Andrew kept his eyes forward, his father's military stride matching his own. Principal Wilson was waiting in his office with an unexpected guest, a woman in a crisp blazer who introduced herself as Ms. Tran from the school district office. Thank you for coming in early, Principal Wilson began, his usual nervousness more pronounced. Given recent events, the district has taken an interest in our situation. Ms. Tran nodded. What happened in your parking lot has raised serious concerns about the culture at Westlake High. 6 students attacking one, and with a weapon no less. She turned to Andra. I've reviewed the video evidence and witness statements. Your actions were clearly self-defense. Andrew's father leaned forward slightly. Then why is my son still suspended while we're here having this conversation? That's actually why we called you in, Principal Wilson replied. In light of the evidence and the district's review, Andrew's suspension has been lifted. He can return to classes today. Relief washed over Andra, but Ms. Tran wasn't finished. There's more, she continued. We're implementing an immediate anti-bullying initiative across the school, and we'd like Andra to be part of it. Andra blinked in surprise. Me? Why? Because you handled an impossible situation with remarkable restraint, she explained. Many students have come forward since the incident, describing years of intimidation by the same group of boys. Some of these incidents were reported, but she glanced pointedly at Principal Wilson, who looked away. They weren't addressed properly. Principal Wilson cleared his throat. The park, certain families have significant influence in our community. It complicated matters. That ends now, Ms. Tran stated firmly. The district is launching a full investigation into how bullying reports have been handled. And we believe having Andrew involved in our new initiative would send a powerful message. Andrew's father placed a hand on his son's shoulder. What exactly would this involve? We're setting up peer mediation training, conflict resolution workshops, and Ms. Tran looked directly at Andrew. We'd like to offer an optional after-school self-defense class focused not just on techniques, but on responsibility and when self-defense is appropriate. Andrew, with your background, would you consider helping lead it? The proposal hung in the air. Andrew thought about all the years his uncle had taught him that fighting was always the last resort, that with great skill came greater responsibility. I'd need to think about it, he said honestly. Of course, Ms. Tran smiled. Take your time. As they left the office, Andrew was surprised to see a small crowd gathered in the hallway, Raj and Lee at the front, along with at least a dozen other students he barely recognized. Welcome back, Raj grinned. A girl Andrew knew only from his English class stepped forward. We wanted to say thanks. Chris and his friends made my freshman year hell. Nobody ever stood up to them before. Andrew felt uncomfortable with the attention. I just did what anyone would do. But that's just it, Lee said. Nobody else did. The morning passed in a blur of classes and curious stares. By lunchtime, the cafeteria fell into a hush when Andrew entered. He spotted an empty table in the corner and headed for it, but before he could sit down, students began to join him, not just Raj and Lee, but others who'd never spoken to him before. Is it true you're starting a self-defense class? Someone asked. Andrew looked surprised. News travels fast. So it's true. A skinny freshman boy looked at him with hopeful eyes. I haven't decided yet, Andrew admitted. You should do it, Raj encouraged. Think how many kids could learn what you know, not just about fighting, but about when not to fight. As lunch ended, Andrew headed to his locker. Turning the corner, he froze. Chris stood there alone, arm in a sling, face still bruised from their encounter. For a tense moment, they just stared at each other. Then Chris spoke, his voice lacking its usual arrogance. My dad wanted to press charges, get you expelled. He looked down. I told him not to. Andrew waited, saying nothing. That knife. I've never brought something like that to school before. I don't know what I was thinking. Chris wouldn't meet his eyes. My dad's making me see someone, a counselor. Says I need to figure out why I'm so angry all the time. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was something. Andrew nodded slowly. Good luck with that. Chris finally looked up. Did you really train in Brazil? Like professionally? 8 years, Andrew answered. My uncle runs an academy there. Chris seemed to struggle for words. That's pretty cool. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Ms. Tran and Principal Wilson. There you are, Andrew, Ms. Tran said, then noticed Chris. Everything okay here? We're just talking, Andrew assured her. As Chris walked away, Ms. Tran turned to Andrew. Have you given any thought to our proposal? Andrew watched Chris's retreating figure, thinking about all that had happened since he arrived at Westlake. He thought about his uncle's teachings, about responsibility and strength used wisely. I'll do it, he decided. But on one condition. What's that? She asked. It has to be open to everyone, Andrew said firmly. Even Chris and his friends, if they want to come. Principal Wilson looked startled, but Ms. Tran smiled. I think that can be arranged. Later that afternoon, Andrew stood in the school gym, surveying the empty space that would soon be filled with students eager to learn what he knew. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders, but it felt right somehow. His phone buzzed with a text from his father. Your uncle called. Told him about your new teaching gig. He's proud of you. So am I. Andrew smiled, feeling for the first time since moving that maybe, just maybe, this town could become home after all. 3 months passed like a deep breath finally released. Winter had settled over Westlake, dusting the school grounds with snow that crunched under Andrew's boots as he crossed the parking lot. The same parking lot where everything had changed. Hey, wait up, Raj called, jogging to catch up. His breath formed small clouds in the cold air. You ready for the big demonstration today? Andrew nodded, adjusting the gym bag on his shoulder. Inside were his guy and belt, things he once kept hidden, now worn with quiet pride. As ready as I'll ever be. The gymnasium had been transformed for the community showcase. Mats covered the floor, chairs lined the perimeter, and a small stage stood at one end. Parents, teachers, and students filtered in, filling the space with excited chatter. Principal Wilson, who somehow stood taller these days, approached Andrew with a smile. Quite the turnout. Your class has become quite popular. It's not just my class, Andrew replied. It belongs to all of them. And it was true. What had started as a small after-school program had grown into something the entire school talked about. 3 times a week, students gathered to learn not just self-defense techniques, but also discipline, respect, and control. The waiting list had grown so long that Andrew had recruited 2 seniors with karate backgrounds to help teach the beginners. In the locker room, Andrew changed into his guy, the familiar fabric a comfort against his skin. As he tied his belt, the door opened and Chris walked in. Their relationship had evolved into something neither could have predicted, not friendship exactly, but a cautious respect. Nervous? Chris asked, already dressed in his white beginner's guy. The sling was long gone, but something in the way he carried himself had changed. The old arrogance had been replaced by something more thoughtful. A little, Andrew admitted. Public speaking isn't exactly my thing. Chris nodded. You'll do fine. Just pretend you're in class, teaching us like normal. The transformation in Chris had been the most surprising part of the past 3 months. After their hallway conversation, he had shown up to the very first self-defense class, standing awkwardly at the back. Andrew had paired him with Lee of all people, a decision that raised eyebrows, but both boys had risen to the challenge. Weeks of training had a way of breaking down barriers. On the mat, status and history mattered less than discipline and effort. Chris had thrown himself into training with unexpected dedication, his counseling sessions seeming to fuel a genuine desire for change. Now, as they walked out to the mats together, Andrew felt a strange sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with fighting techniques. Ms. Tran stepped up to the microphone, her voice echoing through the gym. "Welcome to Westlake High's first Community Safety and Anti-Bullying Showcase. Over the past 3 months, our students have been learning valuable lessons about personal safety, conflict resolution, and the responsibility that comes with physical training." Andrew scanned the crowd, finding his father sitting proudly in the front row. Next to him was an unexpected guest, Andrew's uncle, who had flown in from Brazil especially for this event. He'd arrived yesterday, full of stories and pride when he saw what his nephew had built. "I'll now turn things over to our student instructor, Andrew Johnson, who has been the driving force behind this program." The applause caught Andrew off guard. He stepped forward, suddenly aware of all the eyes on him. 3 months ago, he would have done anything to avoid this attention. Now he stood before the entire school, centered and calm. "Thank you for coming today," he began. "When I started at Westlake, I tried to hide who I was and what I knew. I thought keeping my head down was the best way to get through school." He paused, finding his rhythm. "But I was wrong. Sometimes the right thing to do isn't staying quiet or walking away. Sometimes you have to stand up, not just for yourself, but for others." From the corner of his eye, Andrew saw Raj and Lee nodding encouragingly. In Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, there's a saying, "A black belt is just a white belt who never gave up." What that means is that growth takes time, patience, and a lot of falling down before you learn to stand strong. Andrew gestured to the students assembled on the mats behind him, 20 teenagers of different sizes, backgrounds, and social groups, all dressed in white kiss. Among them were faces that would have never interacted 3 months ago, chief freshmen, former targets of bullying, and yes, even Chris and 2 of his former friends. "Today, we want to show you what we've learned, not just techniques, but something more important, how to respect ourselves and each other." The demonstration began with basic movements, students moving in synchronized patterns across the mats. They progressed to partner work, showing how leverage and technique could overcome size and strength. Andrew moved among them, making small corrections, his confidence growing with each moment. For the final demonstration, he called Chris forward. A murmur ran through the crowd. Many still remembered the parking lot video. "Chris has been one of our most dedicated students," Andrew said, surprising those who didn't know how things had changed. "He's going to help me demonstrate how someone smaller can defend against a larger attacker." They bowed to each other, then began. Chris attacked with controlled energy, and Andrew deflected, redirected, and eventually used Chris's momentum to bring him safely to the mat. The crowd applauded as they stood and bowed again, respect evident between them. As the demonstration ended and people mingled on the mats, Mr. Parker, Chris's father, approached Andrew. The man seemed smaller somehow, less intimidating than that day in the school hallway. "My son has changed these past months," he said without preamble. "His counselor says it's the most remarkable turnaround she's seen in a teenager." He extended his hand. "I believe I owe you an apology and my thanks." Andrew shook the offered hand, words momentarily failing him. Later, as he helped roll up the mats, Andrew found himself surrounded by his friends. Lee playfully attempted a takedown, which Andrew easily countered, both of them laughing. Raj talked excitedly about making the self-defense program a permanent part of school curriculum. "So," his uncle asked, joining their circle, "was it worth it, coming to this small town?" Andrew looked around the gym, at Chris helping a freshman with a technique, at Principal Wilson and Ms. Tran discussing future programs, at his father chatting with parents who had come to thank him for his son's influence. "Yeah," Andrew said, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "It was definitely worth it." As they walked home through the snow, Andrew realized that the path that had once felt so lonely was now filled with footprints walking alongside his own. The new kid had found not just his place, but his purpose, and in doing so, he had helped an entire school find a better way forward.